There is a distinct, merciless certainty that can only be born in the freezing cold of the highlands. A certainty that tells you the first mistake in the wilderness is always your last. I used to handle the night guarding and maintenance shifts inside the dome of the miniature astronomical observatory belonging to the Aberdeen County Research Institute in Scotland. It was perched on an isolated, rocky plateau where no human soul ever crossed paths. I say used to because after those cursed hours I endured a few months ago, I swore an oath never to set foot inside an isolated facility after sunset for as long as I live. The observatory was small, built in that ancient style of stone and timber that becomes completely cut off from the world the moment the hours grow late and the foggy blizzards intensify. The bulk of my night work centered around reviewing the telescope lenses, adjusting the mechanical observation angles, logging cloud coordinates, and receiving rare wireless reports from the forest rangers patrolling below the plateau. I remember the details of that night with a terrifying clarity that still tears at my mind. The clock had just ticked past 2:30 a.m. By then, the wireless communications from the neighboring towers had gone entirely dead due to the dampness, leaving me utterly alone with no real work to do except wait for the dawn. I was aimlessly flipping through my paper journal, trying to kill time and dispel the loneliness creeping through the cracks of the walls. In a moment of suffocating restlessness, I stepped out onto the external iron balcony to breathe in some fresh air, violently rubbing my palms together to fight off the biting cold that threatened to freeze my limbs. I exhaled sharply a few times, watching the white plumes of my breath dissolve into the icy void. The rocky pathway surrounding the dome was completely empty. There was nothing but the stabilization pillars, the rugged dirt driveway, and the dense, pitch-black expanse of towering pine forest stretching far below. The oil lamp hanging above the main gate was trembling, casting erratic, dim flickers. I remember the fog being so dense you could literally see the moisture droplets suspended in the stagnant air. Even though the town wasn't very far behind a mountain, the silence up there was absolute and terrifying. Just as I was about to turn around and return to the stream of warmth inside my room, a sudden movement caught the corner of my eye near the edge of the railing. I snapped my head around with lightning speed, only to realize that someone was standing perfectly still behind one of the massive iron support pillars of the external telescope. How had I not noticed his presence prior to that microsecond? He was wearing a heavy coat with a dark red woolen hood, pulled all the way up to conceal his features, while keeping both hands buried deep inside his wide pockets. There was no vehicle or horse in sight, and the observatory's location was impossible to reach on foot at this hour, so it was glaringly obvious he wasn't a researcher who had lost his way. What was truly sinister was that he didn't seem intent on approaching the observatory door or seeking shelter. He simply stood there, half-turned toward my glass window, in a manner that implied he was there solely to watch me and track my movements. At first glance, I tried to reassure myself, thinking he might be waiting for his hunting companions, but his subsequent movements struck pure terror into my heart. He began shifting and swaying in a bizarre, slow, circular pattern around the pillar, as if bracing himself for something. I quietly backed away and stepped inside the room, taking care to keep my eyes locked onto him through the thick glass of the window. I tracked him while continuously feigning to be busy sorting through astronomical charts, hoping someone would emerge from the darkness to pick him up and end this unease. But after a few minutes, he began walking toward the main wooden gate, slowly at first. Then he suddenly pushed the door and barged inside with a rapid, abrupt motion, as if making his decision all at once without a second thought. He marched directly toward my desk, but he didn't utter a greeting or explain his intrusion. He just stared at my face with sharp, rigid eyes, as if evaluating my physical build and the level of fear in my gaze. Then, in a hurried, stuttering tone, he began to improvise words, claiming his wooden cart had broken its wheels at the rocky bend leading up to the plateau. He claimed he needed help lifting it or perhaps some oil for the axles so he could descend to the next village. A genuine shock froze my limbs. He hadn't even bothered to make his ruse sound convincing or logical, and I didn't believe for a second that he expected me to buy this lie, especially since the road had been completely blocked by snow for 2 days. I offered to use the radio transmitter to send a distress call to the mountain rescue team instead of going out with him. He snapped with a sudden sharpness, shaking his head in a flat refusal. No need, and demanded harshly that I lend him a large flashlight and just assist him for a few seconds to inspect the breakdown outside. There was something profoundly wrong surrounding this man. There was no longer any doubt about it. The way he spoke and the scrutinizing glare with which he monitored my reactions made me certain that this conversation was nothing but a test to gauge my readiness. To be fair to myself, strangers who knock on the gates of mountain observatories at those late hours are usually eccentric or exhausted, and I wondered for a single second whether the man genuinely needed help but was just crude or under the influence of alcohol. I asked him where exactly his broken cart was located, and he pointed his hand toward the analog monitor screen mounted behind me, the feed for the lower external pathway camera, and stated it was resting right behind the iron gate of the path. I was starkly skeptical, but I turned to glance at the screen to expose his lie. To my absolute bewilderment, I actually spotted the faint silhouette of a small wooden cart parked out there under the fog. I thought to myself, my God, perhaps I've misjudged the man, and he truly needs a lifeline. But at that exact second, I caught a terrifying detail. I had personally checked that very pathway just seconds before stepping out onto the balcony, and there had been no vehicle parked there. I locked my focus and pressed my eyes onto the monitor again, catching a very minute, nearly invisible movement near the rear frame of the cart. There was a second human figure crouching and hiding in the pitch darkness, just out of the camera's direct line of sight. A freezing wave of absolute terror struck the depths of my chest, making every single hair on my body stand on end. I forced my lips to mirror a calm, artificial smile, showing my agreement to go out and help him, but told him in a casual tone that I first needed to fetch the heavy inspection lantern and the gate keys from the rear records room. I turned away slowly, deliberately showing no suspicion so he wouldn't spring upon me. The exact microsecond I stepped outside his direct line of sight behind the dividing wall, I slammed my fist with all my might onto the wired emergency alarm button connected to the county's main guard tower. The massive brass bell instantly erupted into a deafening clang, screaming a terrifying alarm that echoed through the dome of the observatory. I expected him to charge at me aggressively to silence the alarm, but what he did instead was far more unsettling and psychologically unnerving. All the nervous energy and agitation he had been faking vanished instantly. He stopped shifting from foot to foot, his body relaxed completely, his entire body language transforming into a murderous calm. Then a slow, wide, knowing grin spread across his lips, as if he had all the time in the world and didn't care about the alarm, as if the sheer panic I was experiencing was nothing but an amusing game to him. A paralyzing dread seized me, rendering me entirely incapable of confronting him physically. In one smooth, quiet motion, he spun around and took off, running out through the gate. I rushed to the glowing monitor screens immediately, arriving just in time to catch their two silhouettes fleeing at a terrifying speed. They didn't head toward the parked cart. Instead, they plunged straight ahead, vanishing into the thick brush of the dark pine forest behind the observatory. The cart remained sitting there entirely alone, motionless, devoid of lights, with no trace of a human soul inside. By the time the Federal Border Patrol units arrived a while later, the scene was identical to what I had witnessed. The cart was in its place, but the men had vanished as if the earth had swallowed them whole, leaving no clear footprints leading into the forest and no sign indicating their direction. Suddenly, one of the officers shouted, sweeping his flashlight toward a terrifying detail I hadn't noticed in the heat of the moment. The side door of the wooden cart was completely open from the side, hidden from the camera. This meant a third individual had been crouching inside the entire time, waiting for me to step out of the front gate while the first tried to lure me, and the second lay in ambush behind the frame to liquidate me. The police took my statement in full. I handed over the surveillance tapes, and that was that. A few days later, The federal investigator followed up with the results of the check. It turned out they had towed the cart and examined its wooden plate and chassis, revealing it had been reported stolen from a distant county nearly a week prior, over 100 miles away from the plateau. No one ever came forward to claim it. There were no missing persons reports in those parts, and no other crimes associated with the vehicle's chassis. It was simply a getaway vehicle abandoned in the middle of an isolated forest, with no logical explanation for its presence other than hunting down witnesses. Months have passed since that night, and the case remains shrouded in absolute mystery with no new leads. I do not know why these isolated outposts represent such popular targets for abduction rings and clandestine networks. But the only thing I can confirm with an absolute oath is that I will never accept working another night shift under the darkness of the sky again. Since the 1980s, specifically during the harsh winter of 1984, a cold certainty settled deeply into my mind. Isolation is not the absence of human beings, but rather the heavy, thrumming presence of other things waiting for the perfect moment to spring upon you. I used to work the late-night security shift inside the central archives of the old courthouse building in the British county of Lincolnshire. It wasn't the worst job in the world, but after spending a few months trapped between those damp, stone walls, you begin to feel as though you are floating aimlessly outside the boundaries of time. The nights bleed and blur together. The same towering wooden shelves packed with ancient case files, the same monotonous routine, and the same dull, irritating hum emitting from the outdated gas lamps hanging from the ceiling. I always kept telling myself that a better opportunity would eventually come to pull me out of this subterranean tomb. My shift centered entirely on the old Criminal Records Hall, a location I preferred only because it was the quietest, most secluded zone in the entire facility. No one exactly rushes in at 2 in the morning to dig up century-old documents. Most people entering the building at this hour were either lawyers frantically reviewing an urgent case at the absolute last minute, or night watchmen doing their routine rounds to log their attendance before returning to their outdoor patrols. It was for this exact reason that I noticed his presence immediately. At first, I didn't give it a terrifying dimension. He merely looked like an exhausted researcher wandering through the aisles, or perhaps someone waiting for an employee to finish up. But after a few minutes passed, a chilling realization hit me. He wasn't looking for any file. In fact, he wasn't making the slightest effort to even pretend he was browsing or searching. He kept appearing at every single turn I made. Every time I raised my eyes from the desk, I caught him lingering nearby, hovering in the adjacent wooden aisle, or standing completely still by the corner of the abandoned iron storage crates. He wasn't flipping through papers. He was just standing there, fixing his dead, unblinking glare onto me to track my every move. I tried to convince myself that I was overreacting and being paranoid. The building was massive, the vaulted ceilings were dark, and perhaps the man was just taking his time lost in thought. But the deliberate way he moved, always maintaining a close enough distance for me to notice him, yet never approaching me by a single step, set a creeping wave of danger churning deep in my gut. I kept waiting for him to end this unsettling hesitation and step forward to ask for the location of a document, but he never did. It felt as though he had an overwhelming desire for me to see him, to feel his presence, which made absolutely no logical sense to me at the time. I backed toward the desk to use the old wired intercom system to summon the building supervisor, but I was struck with shock to find the line completely dead, yielding nothing but a silent, hollow hiss due to a sudden malfunction in the wiring. Just as I was drowning in confusion, caught between the choice of abandoning my post or going to look for the supervisor myself, I suddenly felt a cold, powerful hand violently wrap around my wrist. I nearly jumped out of my skin from the sheer shock. Before I could muster any reaction, a woman's voice cut through the silence, loud, friendly, and dripping with an overly familiar, artificial cheerfulness. She exclaimed at the top of her lungs, "There you are at last," before launching into a continuous stream of small talk about how she had been looking all over the building for me for the past hour. I turned toward her in sheer, utter bewilderment and shock, staring at a woman I had never seen before in my entire life. She was wearing a wide, beaming smile, her grip locked firmly onto my arm, as if we were two old friends reuniting after years of separation. Before a single word could escape my mouth to question her, she leaned in close to my ear, her voice instantly dropping into a low, sharp whisper laced with urgency and speed. She muttered rapidly, "That man watching you is sketching the layout of the entrances and tracking your steps. Follow me right now, and do not argue with him." My heart dropped straight into my stomach. I turned my head ever so slightly, just enough to catch a fleeting glance backward. The man was still standing there in the deep shadows. Only now, he wasn't even pretending to look at the shelves. He was glaring directly into my eyes with an open, piercing intensity. A freezing wave of terror crept beneath my skin, and I surrendered to her hand as she dragged me behind her, not even questioning her motives. I clung to the firm way she held my arm, and to the loud, casual tone she used to talk through the aisles, feigning a normal conversation as if we were just two companions meeting, and I felt a surge of immense, overwhelming gratitude that a complete stranger had noticed the trap I was in and put herself in an uncomfortable, dangerous position just to save me. The woman expertly kept up her theatrical act as we walked, rambling continuously about an imaginary trip she had taken or some inside joke we supposedly shared. My brain couldn't even process the words. My thoughts were entirely stuck on the man behind us. Had he really been sketching out my movements? That was creepy as hell. I desperately wanted to know if he was still tracking our footsteps, but I couldn't summon the courage to turn around and look back into that dark expanse. The woman steered me through the narrow aisles of the archives with fast, deliberate strides. I barely registered where we were heading. My only focus was that we were moving, and that the distance between me and that suspicious man was expanding with every passing second. In all honesty, I was fully expecting her to drop the charade of knowing me once we were out of his line of sight, but she relentlessly kept it up, pulling me forward while talking in the exact same artificial tone. The atmosphere was starting to feel deeply unsettling and suspicious. I stole a quick glance behind me, and to my immense relief, there was no trace of the man left in the wooden corridors. I turned to her and told her in a hushed whisper that the danger had passed, and that we should immediately head to the main supervisor's office to report the intruder. But instead of stopping, she squeezed my arm with an even tighter, painful force and said in a dry, commanding voice, "He is still lurking in one of the dark corners. Keep walking." I thought to myself in disbelief, so what? What is he going to do in a government building full of guards and employees in the upper floors? I had been terrified at first because the archive basement was completely void of people. But now that I had broken free from the terror of being alone, I began to realize there was absolutely no logical reason to continue this submissive flight. I told her this in a stern tone, but she kept dragging me forward, steering me toward a pitch-black corridor. I firmly planted my feet, halting completely, then twisted my wrist in a sharp, circular motion to loosen her suffocating grip from my body. "You can let go of me now," I said dryly. "It's over." But she didn't. She looked into my eyes, and a bizarre smile spread across her lips, one completely devoid of any human emotion. Tugging my clothes by force, she said, "Come on, just a little further and we're there." I looked around in pure panic. The basement was completely dead, devoid of any movement. We had bypassed the federal registration desks, the main sorting stations, and the aisles that normally saw employee foot traffic. We were now standing directly in front of the massive evidence storage gates, a dimly lit, nearly empty area. Just beyond that lay the side iron exit of the building, the one exit entirely unmonitored by security cameras, used exclusively by shipping crews for unloading heavy crates at night. At that exact microsecond, the fog cleared from my mind, and I collided with the horrific truth. She wasn't saving me. She was leading me straight into an ambush, guiding me to the isolated exit where the rest of them were waiting. It didn't take my brain a single second to think. I screamed for help at the top of my lungs while twisting my arm with all the raw might and violence I could muster to rip myself free from her crushing grasp. She lost her grip just enough for my wrist to pull free, and I didn't waste a single fraction of a second. I spun around and took off at a full, frantic sprint toward the main reception hall at the front. As I fled, her sharp screams echoed behind me, ordering me to come back, followed instantly by her calling out my actual, full legal name, a name I had not mentioned to her once throughout that entire encounter. I kept running, my chest nearly exploding as I fought for breath, until I spotted one of my fellow guards running toward me with his weapon drawn, clearly reacting to the echoes of my terrified screams. I yelled at him a call for immediate federal backup, which he promptly did. But by then, that woman had already vanished like smoke. By the time the security forces arrived, and I recounted the details of the nightmare, both the woman and the man were nowhere to be found in the entire vicinity. The officers proceeded to review the building's old security footage, and the shocking revelation confirmed my absolute worst kins of nightmares. The tapes revealed that the woman and the man had entered the courthouse together through the main gates, moving seamlessly as a team the entire time. The man's face was as clear as day in one of the frozen frames, but the woman had deliberately turned her head away and lowered her hood in every single shot, executing a calculated movement that prevented the cameras from capturing the details of her face. A rigid certainty took hold of me. This woman was the mastermind and the actual tactician behind the entire operation, leaving me infuriated that the cameras had failed to record her face. Every single second, every single move that night had been meticulously planned and plotted. The official authorities took over the investigation, and the entire incident was formally logged into the records as a failed political abduction and liquidation attempt. To this day, I am still waiting for a resolution or a lead that unmasks their identities. Tracking the man down should technically be simple, given how clearly his face was caught on camera, but the greatest riddle that tears at my mind and robs me of sleep in a state of unbearable terror is, how did that woman know my exact personal name? That detail alone proves that those monsters didn't just pick me at random as a passing target. I was a calculated execution, a direct hit plan behind walls I cannot see.